Hey everybody, this is your daily dose of all things royal.
Why did you want to write the book? Why now?
After 38 years of so many other people telling a different version of my story, it seemed like a good time to be able to own my own story and be able to share it truthfully. 38 years of having my story told by so many different people with an intentional spin and distortion felt like a good time to own my story and be able to tell it myself. So I'm actually really grateful that I've had the opportunity to tell my story, because it's my story to tell.
This is the other side of the story, right? After 38 years. They've told their side of the story. This is the other side of the story. Yes, I have actually watched The Crown.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
The recent stuff or the older stuff?
The older stuff and the more recent stuff.
Do you fact check it while you watch it?
Yes, I do, actually. Which, by the way, another reason why it's so important that history has it right.
Hello, my gorgeous, good-looking friends. If you're like me and paid attention to the things that Harry was saying during his Spare World tour, then you would get the impression that this book has become the gospel of Prince Harry. So it's his words coming out of his head and into this book, and it's solidified in history. So today, many of you are aware that Harry went to court and testified against Mirror Group newspapers. Now, I haven't read what has been reported by the journalists who attended today's session, because first I wanted to read Harry's witness statement in order for this stuff to make sense, because it's kind of hard to do it, especially if you're not seeing it live and having to rely on the media to report it and then form an opinion. So I wanted to look at this first, this 55-page document. I started to read through it and then realized that I needed to break out the gospel of Prince Harry. We all know that according to Prince Harry, misinformation is a humanitarian crisis. So we don't want to be spreading any kind of disinformation here, or misinformation, or whatever they're calling it these days. Now, I'm not going to go through this whole entire document with you because it's 55 pages long. I'm just going to give you the top 10 things that I found important for the world to know in doing my part in reducing misinformation, disinformation online. So the Minister of Truth, Prince Harry, signs the confirmation of compliance in which he understands that the purpose of this witness statement is to set out matters of fact, that he has personal knowledge. So to give us a little behind the scenes and background, number 45 states, to prepare this witness statement, and this is if Prince Harry is speaking, I have been through each of the articles highlighted with my solicitors on a series of video calls in January and February 2023. To a very small extent, this exercise has refreshed my memory, but I do remember a lot of what was going on throughout the relevant period, including the incidents of stories referred to in the articles below. Even if I don't recall seeing the specific articles at the time, I set out my recollection and knowledge of these events and the impact of the articles in the paragraphs below. The list of documents refers to both the text-only and as published versions of the articles to the extent that these have been disclosed by the defendant. This actually makes sense because let's not forget that the Gospel of H had been written and he had been working on that for the past 2 years. So rightfully so, his memory didn't really need all that much refreshing. Now, even though he's stating that they didn't actually sit down to go through the articles till January and February of 2023, realize that Harry was involved with this case in 2022. So as he is writing his memoir and telling his truth, he also had an idea as to what this case was about. So obviously, one would expect this document under the court of law is going to echo the Gospel of Harry. So let's begin with number 1. In this document, Harry lists a total of 16 people that Prince Harry was in regular contact with and often exchanged voicemail messages. In that list, it included his brother, the Prince of Wales, King Charles, his mom, and one of the core people of this document, Chelsea Davy, his former girlfriend. According to him, he says that they had met in about early 2004 and were in a relationship which continued on and off until around mid 2010. So, according to him, this relationship was long distance and they relied a lot on speaking over the phone. But that's not what the Gospel of Prince Harry said. So, according to the book Spare, if you notice here at the bottom where it's highlights in blue, it says that March 2004, he states that I'd met someone years earlier, a girl from South Africa, Chelsea. But in the witness statement, it says they met in early 2004. Surely there must be an explanation for this. Potato, potato. We'll just pretend we didn't see that one. Number 9. So Carolyn Flack was also listed as an associate that exchanged quite a few voicemails with Prince Harry. Sadly, she took her life in 2020 at the age of 40. But he lists her anyway and states Carolyn Flack, the late television presenter, was a friend of mine. We met in around 2009, and during the relevant period, we attended a couple of social events together. The press were always interested in Caroline because of her job as a well-known presenter. For a brief period, I was in phone contact with Caroline, and we exchanged voicemails regarding our personal lives and to make arrangements for meeting up. Well, that's certainly an interesting version. According to the Gospel of Prince Harry, if you see in the middle there in blue, Black, they called her. She was funny and sweet and cool. I met her at a restaurant with some mates months after Chels and I had gone our separate ways. But wait a minute. Didn't he say that he broke up with Chelsea in the middle of or around mid 2010? Well, isn't that interesting? How convenient that we can't validate this because the woman in question is dead. Number 8. In the Gospel of Prince Harry, this truth warrior shares with the reader the fond memory of the first time he and Caroline Flack went out. He writes, "Days later, we met for dinner and games. Poker night at Margot's flat, Bramham Gardens. After an hour or so, I stepped outside, disguised in one of Marco's cowboy hats, to speak with Billy the Rock. As I exited the building, I lit a cigarette and looked right. There, behind a parked car, 2 sets of feet and 2 bobbing heads. Whoever it was didn't recognize me in Marco's hat. So I was able to stroll casually down to Billy and lean into his police car and whisper, 'Bogey at 3 o'clock.' What? No. Billy, how could they have known? Search me. Billy bolted from the car, ran around the corner, surprised the 2 paps. He screamed at them, but they screamed right back, entitled, emboldened. They didn't get their photo that night. Small victory. But very soon after, they papped me and Flack, and those photos set off a frenzy." Okay, in this, I just want you to get out of the fact days later, they met for dinner and games, and it was poker night at Marco's flat. And then saying that they didn't get any photo of him and Caroline. But in Harry's witness statement, it's a completely different recall of events. In one of the articles that was presented, Harry's date with Gladiator star, meaning Caroline Flack, on April 19, 2009, it says, "The article is marked both as an exclusive and picture exclusive, as it carries 2 photographs of me and the well-known television personality Caroline Flack, together on a street in Fulham, London. The photographs were taken at night. The article reports that I had dashed from my helicopter training in Lincolnshire to be with Caroline, where we joined 4 friends for a lively dinner party. It reports we left the house after midnight with an onlooker." And in the next line, he goes, "I remember this article and these photographs so clearly because at the time I was so shocked and livid." Now, this is the kicker. The photographs are taken outside Mark Dyer's apartment. We had a poker night. Well, that's funny. Didn't the Gospel of Prince Harry say that they didn't get photos of them that night? And it was a small victory? So, poker night at Margot's apartment with Caroline Flack. Photos weren't taken that night, according to Spare the Gospel. And then Harry's witness statement says photos were taken. If Spare is the truth and the gospel, according to Harry,
Another reason why it's so important that history has it right.
I don't know what the laws are in the UK, but in the United States, we call that perjury, and you can be prosecuted for it. Number 7. Hooray! Harry's dumped was a feature story in the Sunday Mirror on November 11, 2007. And according to the witness statement, says that reports that Chelsea and I had split up and that I had been on a night out to down my sorrows. Harry's testimony says about the article was that he did go to a particular nightclub, Amiga in Mayfair, on a few occasions, but as I've said previously, my movements were never intended to be public knowledge. He goes into saying the whole narrative of the article seemed designed to make me look bad. It's another attack on me for doing what most of my military colleagues were doing, just enjoying an occasional night out, but it's only me that's under a microscope. And further down, it says here, what also strikes me about this article is the reference to the fallout between me and Chelsea. Again, how would they have known this? My solicitors have shown me an invoice for the agency, BDI, dated November 9, 2007, with the subject, Project Harry. So, as you can see here, he's explaining that somebody had to have known that him and Chelsea had an argument and that they broke up, but how would they have known? And that he was out, hanging out with his friends, having a good time at this club. In the Gospel of Prince Harry and the truth that he wants the world to believe, he tells a different story. And it says, the papers reported that we'd broken up. One headline, hooray, Harry's dumped. The distance, the different life goals were too much. It was hard enough maintaining a relationship in the same country, but with me going off to war, it just didn't seem feasible. Of course, none of this was true. We'd not broken up. She'd given me a touching, tender farewell and promised to wait for me. She knew, therefore, to disregard all the other stories in the papers about how I'd reacted to the breakup. Reportedly, I'd gone on a pub crawl and guzzled a few dozen vodkas before staggering into a waiting car. Number 6. Meeting Chelsea's parents. So in Harry's testimony, he raises the article that says when Harry met Daddy, and this was December 13, 2004. Now, this article was printed on page 11 of the Daily Mirror, and it revealed details of meeting Chelsea's family for the first time. Bullet number 112 says, I was introduced to Chelsea's father on the previous day, that I was enjoying a holiday with Chelsea in Mozambique, and that we had flown over to the island of Bazarudo to meet other members of her family, including her mother Beverly and brother Sean. It also states I would be flying back to Britain on December 19th. And he goes in to say, I'm at a complete loss as to how these details were obtained. As I've said previously, details of my travel plans, including dates I would be flying, were not released by the palace for security reasons, yet the specific date I returned to Britain was published days in advance. It was also true that I met Chelsea's family for the first time. So once again, Spare shoots this testimony in the foot, because in the book, it's stating that Chelsea invited him to meet her parents in Cape Town, not Mozambique. But that's not the worst part about this passage, because just right before that, he says he and Chelsea get back to Heathrow and they were papped, but he says, never fun for me, but not a shock either. There had been a few years after Mummy disappeared when I'd hardly ever been papped, but now it was constant. And then a couple lines down, as you can see, you get used to it. I lied. Well, I'm sure you lied about a lot, as we're discovering. So when you look at that sentence, there had been a few years after Mummy disappeared when I'd hardly ever been papped. And here we have this court case where he's talking about intrusion throughout his whole life and how severe it was growing up, this doesn't look good. Not one bit. Number 5, the gap year. So, according to the Book of Truth by Prince Harry, he stated that going to Australia, he had 9 of the best weeks in his life, and that was in December. But when you look at the witness statement and he talks about Australia, the article that he's referencing was in September, and the palace actually had to issue a statement because the situation was so terrible for him and the press intrusion was just so unbearable. So which was it? Was it the best 9 weeks of your life or was it misery? Whatever. Moving on, number 4. And we're also going to combine number 3 with this because I'm getting so irritated of all these lies. I don't believe the witness statement, nor do I believe, well, I never believed anything that was said in Spare, but the Book of Truth that Harry wants everyone to believe states that he planned his gap year to spend half of it in Australia and half of it in Africa doing charity work that his mom was doing and continuing that. He flew home from Australia around Christmas time, went out and partied, and then a few days later he was off to Lesotho. Well, that's not the story that's being told in this testimony. It says here that the article had discussed his plans to spend some of his gap year in Argentina playing polo. Piggybacking off of number 4 into number 3 is the BS story of splitting the time half and half in Australia and then in Africa. It does appear when you look at the other article that's raised, it's almost as if when he came back from Australia, then they decided that maybe Africa was the place that he should be going to. Now, this article was published in November. In the book, Harry comes back from Australia in December and then a few days later flies out to Africa. And if you look at this last paragraph here, it says, I had already decided that I wanted to spend time assisting with aid projects in Africa as my mother had done. Internally, there had been some discussion about my options by the time of this article, November 2003. Mark Dyer had suggested Lesotho to me. It wasn't somewhere I'd heard before, but he and I discussed it in quite some detail. I can't recall if we had taken this location for approval by the date of the article. There you go, by the date of the article. So, contradicting himself from the book. And this last line is interesting. It says, given my experiences in Australia, these kinds of details were on a strictly need-to-know basis. So what this tells me was that he hadn't decided if he was going to be going to Africa for his second half of his gap year or to carry out the rest of the gap year. He was looking at Argentina, playing polo over there. So again, here we have more lies. Is the witness testimony lies, or is the book where so many people had paid over $30 for, thinking that this is his story, lies? We're almost there, guys. Number 2. Recollections definitely vary, and at this point, I don't understand why this case hasn't been thrown out, but another article that Harry is using to position his security importance is an article that came out in 2008 about his whereabouts and the reason why he had to be withdrawn from Afghanistan. And in this witness statement, he says, I had been withdrawn from Afghanistan in March 2008 because of the security threat my regiment faced. There was supposed to be a press embargo, and in an attempt to keep this in place, it had been agreed that, subject to certain details being kept strictly confidential, some members of the British media would join me for a period to take exclusive photographs and footage. Even in a war zone, I couldn't escape the media. Unfortunately, an Australian journalist revealed my location, and an American website broke the press embargo. So, in his witness testimony, he's blaming the United States for breaking this so-called embargo and secrecy around where he was during this time. But in the truth that is supposed to go down in history books, he says, An Australian magazine had outed me, told the world I was in Afghanistan. The magazine was inconsequential, so no one noticed at first. But then some bell end in America picked up the story, posted it on his worthless website, and that got picked up by the crawlers. Let's not forget the beginning of this video. Harry had stated that he remembered most of it, just a little bit that was refreshing to his memory when they were going over these receipts. So you can't keep your story straight, even though you just wrote about it in your book? Nah, bro, come on now, you're not fooling anybody. And finally, number 1, we made it to the end. Now, this one takes the cherry for me. So, in the testimony, he talks about how the press found out about his drug use, or I don't know, it was too long, I didn't read. The key important thing that you need to understand here is that while he's blaming the media for leaking all these details about his drug use, and we know from the gospel that he was very open about the various drugs that he was taking. Here he's admitting that the palace helped soften the message and gave some quotes in order to help Harry's image. It says at the bottom here, my father didn't make any direct comment to the press. A statement was made by the palace in response to the news of the world story. This was handled by a light, small team internally. There you go, guys. He had support. So now this vindicates the royal family, because in this book of lies, because that's exactly what it is, it says here, when that headline came out about, or when the headlines came out about his drug use, as you can see, he blamed his father and he blamed Camilla for being the ones who were participating in getting details and aiding and abetting the press. It says it right there. More, I felt heartbroken at the idea that this had been partly the work of my own family, my own father, and my future stepmother. They abetted this nonsense. For what? To make their own lives a bit easier? Now that you have seen this farce, these last couple statements are going to sound even more ridiculous as I read them out. As he writes, this has become a huge problem of which I have a unique perspective and experience, perhaps, having had a front row seat to it, because they have showed no willingness to change. I feel that I need to make sure that this unlawful behavior is exposed, because obviously, I don't want anybody else going through the same thing that I've been going through on a personal level, but also on a national level, as at the moment, our country is judged globally by the state of our press and our government, both of which I believe are at rock bottom. Democracy fails when your press fails to scrutinize and hold the government accountable, and instead choose to get in bed with them so they can ensure the status quo. I may not have a role within the institution, but as a member of the British royal family and as a soldier upholding important values, I feel there's a responsibility to expose this criminal activity in the name of public interest. The country and the British public deserve to know the depths of what was actually happening then, and indeed now. We will be better off for it. Oh, it gets better. This asshole wants to lecture the court about the very same things that he is guilty of doing over here in the United States for his own gain. Here's what he says. My view is, how can anyone possibly trust a media organization that enjoys the liberties of free press when their own legal people and board cover up the truth? When they have the powers that they have, and where even the police and the government are scared to hold them accountable or seek justice against them, they can truly believe they are above the law. And if they're above the law, then it's the general public that suffer. It's really that simple. Now, you guys understand that he gets that, because exactly what he's saying is going on in the UK is exactly what he's practicing here in the United States. I know I sound like a broken record, but let me remind you that this is a man who is in the United States as a guest, taking it upon himself to align himself with organizations that are directly undermining our own government and democracy, as well as trying to take away and affect our First Amendment rights of freedom of speech. So, for him to come out and guns blaze in this manner while demonstrating that he is a major contributor to disinformation, misinformation, and propaganda, then to go on and say, however, having experienced what I have over the last 6 years in terms of the constant harassment, online and off, intimidation, and abuse that my wife and I have suffered at the hands of the tabloids, this sort of appalling behavior doesn't really surprise me. Well, nobody really cares, Harry. Unfortunately, without proper press regulation, which the current government clearly have no appetite for because their friends in the press said so, it's only going to get worse. You know, this guy better watch it because the United States is not having any of it if he thinks he's going to come over here and try to control the press, because exactly what him and his wife have been doing the last 6 years with the money has been going into exactly doing that. And as he closes off this witness statement, to me, it sounds like he's spiraling. And, I hope he just takes a step back because obviously he needs to. He finalizes this document by signing on the dotted line saying that I believe the facts stated in this witness statement are true. I understand that proceedings for contempt of court may be brought against anyone who makes or causes to be made a false statement in a document verified by a statement of truth without an honest belief in its truth. So what is this actually saying? Like, he can say till the cows come home that I really do feel that what I put out here is the truth, even though I have just laid out to you every which way that this could be lies embedded here. But I don't think that people need to give him a pass because either he's having some type of mental breakdown or people actually believe that he believes what he wrote here. Obviously, I don't want anything to happen to him, but he shouldn't get a pass just because he thinks he's above everybody else and that rules for us don't apply for him. I think it's about time somebody lays a smackdown and puts him in his place. Enough is enough. Anyhow, that's all I have for today. As always, I will be back with more content, but until then, please be safe, and I will talk to you later. Bye!
It was such a fraud.